In terms of what what's our relationship with fungi, it's both positive and negative. Positive side is, all the eating and the medicinal aspects and all of that. The negative side is, they can kill us. We are covered in fungi, so your microbiome in your gut is full of different types of fungi, and their job is to help in breaking down all your food and get the nutrients then into your bloodstream, into your body. You've also got fungi all over your skin, everywhere, and it's when you kill it and when things go out of balance, if you take antibiotics, then you get all kinds of problems, and that affects your immune system. They're saying the immune system largely comes from the gut and the microbiome. So fungi is an important part of that. It's even in all the leaves and the plants. It's not only around the roots. It's actually between the cells and the leaves. It's in the ground. It's growing. There's fungi everywhere. Do you know that we have contaminated the moon with fungi? And spores are very resilient, despite the fact that we had a super clean environment on the spacecraft that went to the moon. There would have been fungal spores, and they would be viable on the moon.
They are tenacious and powerful. They're under the sea. They're in our guts. They're, inside plants. They're in amongst the roots of the trees, and they're all around us. And they're going to far outlive humans, that is for sure,
And the other thing you got to remember is that, the fungi on this planet have survived the great extinctions. There have been several great extinctions on this planet where more or less everything was killed. But fungi don't need sunlight. They don't photosynthesize. And so the different plants that partnered with fungi got that advantage coming out of those periods where the fungi could actually support them and give them nutrients without photosynthesis. Then, of course, when the plants are photosynthesizing, they feed nutrients back to the fungi. Initially, I got interested in mushrooms like a lot of people in Ireland. When we were kids, my parents used to bring us out to East Galway because there were sheep in East Galway, and we'd go out there and fields with sheep in them, we'd look for mushrooms. I remember there'd be kids on the side of the road out in East Galway, and they used to have these little strings of mushrooms, and people would pull over and buy them off them. We're kind of a fungophobic culture in Ireland. I remember bringing home other types of mushrooms as a kid and being told, oh, you can't eat those, they'll poison you, bring them down to the bottom of the garden and bury them. It may have to do with the fact that we're an island. If that happens to you in Spain or France, then you're trading with other cultures, your other cultures around you, and they can say, we eat this one and it's safe. And we eat this one and it's safe.
There's lots of scientific studies, clinical trials, and longitudinal studies that show the impact of countries where people have a culture of eating mushrooms regularly, and really strong correlations to greater longevity, less morbidities, less cancer.
Whereas in Ireland, it's like, you don't have that influence, I suppose, from outside. So if there were bad experiences, perhaps it was decided, we will avoid them. We know the one in the field is safe. Everything else is dangerous.
I'm driving along, and on a wall, a stone wall, like with mud and stuff around it, I notice, and I say, "Oh wow, it's a mushroom." So we stopped. It looked absolutely fantastic. So anyway, I picked it, I brought it home. So I decided I would slice it and dry it. Now, there was a lady in my life at the time. So she threw some into the pan and cooked in butter and a bit of oil, and then threw egg in on top. Absolutely delicious.
Mushroom poisoning here is getting more common. I suppose here we're driven to by liability. So if the hospital takes on the responsibility of treating you depending on the mushroom you ate, then they've got to stand over the fact that they're sure about the mushroom. And so I suppose that skill set may not be there.
All of a sudden, I did not feel good. I went into the bathroom. I threw up, but felt I wanted to throw up some more. It's the mushroom. So I said, look, I phone for an ambulance. I tell you, if you ask me, we would quite happily have died, okay? Just to get rid of it, I had done what you're supposed to do, and I brought a slice of the mushroom in with me, raw. They had no interest in that whatsoever.
But then the hospital here weren't interested. He was saying, this was the kind of mushroom I ate. And they were kind of saying, all we know is you're some crazy guy going around eating mushrooms. Which is a shame, because the toxins in different toxic mushrooms behave differently. The treatment is different.
Then I read the report. And was admitted with symptoms of brackets magic mushrooms. Absolutely not. That just a conclusion they jumped to. I was picking magic mushrooms. They didn't even, the sample I gave to them probably went straight in the bin.
And if you're, in countries where they get lots of mushroom poisoning, like Poland, they have different approaches depending on the mushroom you ate. Like our antibiotics came from mushrooms. Penicillin being a mold. But an awful lot of our medicines come from fungi and mushrooms, because they've got some very strong chemicals in them. Everyone thinks mushrooms is kind of a plant type thing, but in fact they're closer to us on the same evolutionary line than they are to plants. And they've been on this planet for, they reckon, about 1.5 billion years. They're highly evolved, and they can resist all the pathogens that are out there, so they have built up these substances to help them do that. I know with COVID there were people taking things like cordyceps, which increases your blood's ability to absorb oxygen. Everyone was saying vitamin D is definitely strengthens your immune system against COVID, and mushrooms are high in vitamin D, some in particular. And in fact, if you expose mushrooms to the sunlight, they actually develop vitamin D, even dead mushrooms. The lion's mane, people recovering from strokes, people with MS, people with dementia and things like that, and they're noticing a difference. And we've got a couple of people using it, and they're saying that the verbal abilities have improved with the kids that they have that are in the autistic spectrum. But also, in modern medicine in Japan, turkey tails are turkey tail extract is a part of every cancer treatment, as paid for by the Department of Health. In Western medicine, which has its own strengths, but they're still doing trials on turkey tail. And at the end of the day, then, if it's not patentable or you can't protect it, then you've more or less, all your competitors can now piggyback on the cost and the risks that you took in getting it through the trials. Psychoactive mushrooms were banned back in the 60s, I think, in America under Nixon. So the problem is, at that time they were using some of these substances to treat serious conditions like chronic depression, addiction, and there was a lot of research going on, and they were proving to be very effective. The babies were thrown out with the bathwater. There was a lot of very nice babies in there that shouldn't have been thrown out with that bathwater. The right conditions, dosage control, and with, I think, probably a pre-assessment done of someone's mental condition, these things can be very effective. I know they're using it with counselling for people who are in terminal illness situations and things like that, and these things can be helpful. But I mean, they're powerful and they need to be treated with great respect. I mean, there's a huge proportion of people who are just on antidepressants all the time. So that isn't treating depression. They say that some of these psychoactive mushrooms, using them in the right conditions, can cure depression.
I'm Barry O'Neill. I'm an entrepreneur. I work in the Japanese market. I specifically work at the moment advising large food companies on how to work better with startups, particularly with startups that are innovating in the food and actually on biotech areas. There's been a lot of interest in something called mycelium, and mycelium is the underground part of fungus. So it's effectively the fungus root system. Companies using mycelium to create plant-based bacon, for example. This was like science fiction. This was science fiction really just 5 years ago.
The purpose of fungi, they're the great recyclers, and they do a very important job of breaking down the nutrients. So all the litter on the forest floor. So when you see You know, if you look at a tree, and the tree sheds its leaves and its branches and things like that, and all of that needs to be reabsorbed into the soil, because the trees are all sucking major amounts of nutrients out of that soil. If you think about it, a tree can't move, so its fungal relationship at the root level has to bring all these nutrients back to the roots of the tree. That's one role, and all the plants and trees have that relationship. They all have it, and it's, you know, if you replant a mature tree, you have to make sure you bring plenty of soil around it to re-establish that relationship. I was just talking to a forester recently, and they were saying that for years they replanted 3 trees, and for years, for 3 or 4 years, the trees didn't grow at all. They just didn't do anything, and then they started to grow again. But the explanation was that they had to re-establish the fungal network around the roots so they could thrive. So that's one part, that's the kind of mycorrhizal part. But the other part is the saprotrophic, the recyclers, where they're taking all the leaves and the branches and all the debris that falls on the forest floor is reabsorbed back into the soil. And the guys working in the wood are breaking it all down. You know, if you think about it, a tree trunk on the ground rotting is a whole ecosystem full of biodiversity, of insects and everything. In a modern world, it's like, oh, you know, we need to tidy up the forest and drag all that stuff away. But really, that's a huge resource. And everyone's wondering about, well, what about that little bit of woodland down there that people go into to pick mushrooms? I mean, surely they shouldn't be doing that. It's the opposite, really, you know.
I'm not seeing any damage or risk to the populations of mushrooms except for the reasons of loss of habitat, you know. So the cutting down of forests and hedgerows and you know, chemical practices and glycosaphates and Roundup, that's the problem, you know, not the people who are out picking mushrooms.
If you pull a plow, there are no worms there are no birds following the plow. There's no worms in the ground. There's no fungi in the ground. It's dead. When we were kids, I remember you'd see clouds of birds in the sky, and you'd kind of wonder what it was and go to see, and it was a farmer plowing his field, and the birds are all flocking in to get the worms as he plows them up. Now that's gone. So there's kind of a hypocrisy about, you know, preserving biodiversity. You know, on a massive scale, we're destroying it and continue to destroy it, and no one seems to care. And when I said about these fields all being dead and having no fungi in them, those fields were all carbon banks. The fungus was fixing all the carbon in the ground. And when you come along and poison all that, you release everything. And not only you've just released everything, but you're also, there's no reabsorption going on because the soil is dead. These are huge issues. And people are focusing on the smaller things. This idea of, you know, let's all plant trees. Well, I've got a better idea. Let's stop chopping down trees at an industrial level. This country's full of that. Like right now, they are clear felling forests all throughout Ireland. And they have this, you know, tree plan out there saying how, you know, they're going to be planting more of a mix of indigenous trees, and everyone's saying, great to have indigenous trees. You know, you plant a sapling, it's that size, right? 30 years later, that's a tree. You know, it's a kind of a sizable tree after 30 years. A sapling isn't the same. A big tree absorbs an awful lot of carbon, and it's bringing it in, and the fungi at the root level in the soil are then, the fungal networks and the fungal filaments are all built on carbon blocks. So they're all fixing that carbon into the soil. So it's essential that that's going on. The fungus is actually more important than the tree in terms of that job.